And these are the words of the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld. Each morning, we must hold out the chalice of our being to receive, to carry, and give back. We begin again.
Our opening reading this morning is from the Reverend Kathleen McTeague. We come together this morning to remind one another to rest for a moment on the forming edge of our lives, to resist the headlong tumble into the next moment, until we claim for ourselves awareness and gratitude, taking the time to look into one another's faces and see their communion, the reflection of our own eyes. This house of laughter and silence, memory and hope, is hallowed by our presence together.
Gather the Spirit is our first hymn, and it is number 347. And we join in the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. So be it. And good morning. Good morning. Oh, do it again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. Welcome whether you have been here forever. Welcome if you are here for the very first time. This is a Unitarian Universalist congregation where our principal affirmations are freedom of belief and unbelief, the use of reason in religion, use of head and heart, and also a radical affirmation of otherness, a toleration for difference, and finally, we also stand for scaring the living daylights out of people at every opportunity we can. We are coming off of a most astonishing haunted house weekend. It was here Saturday night and Friday night and Saturday during the day as well. And we have profited something in the neighborhood of $13,000. And that's not even counting the cookies and the cupcakes that you will buy during community hour after the service. We give extraordinary appreciation to Carl Winkler and the entire creative team. And not only that, but you're invited to come here at noon to help break the darn thing down and put it away so it's away until next year. Again, welcome everyone. We extend a particular welcome this morning to the Building Bridges group from our sister congregation in East Lexington, the Fallon Community Church. Why don't you wave your hands, you guys? There they are. Our Building Bridges group was off at Temple Isaiah in Lexington yesterday, and we have others, our folks, visiting elsewhere today. Let's see. Also, this afternoon from 2 to 4 o'clock, Fallon Church, with co-sponsorship of First Parish Bedford, there will be a Raising Anti-Racist Children panel presentation moderated by Liz Walker. It's at the Diamond Middle School in Lexington. We hope that some of you will be able to go there. In the announcements, please also take note that on Wednesday, our parish minister, Annie Gonzalez Milliken, will be hosting a session on strengthening our spirits. And this will be a short series that Annie will be putting together from 7 to 8:30 beginning on Wednesday. And there are blue connection cards in the pews if you want to stay in touch with what goes on around here. And next Sunday at noon, there will be quiche and tell for newcomers to learn a little bit about what goes on around here and meet other newcomers as well as folks from our membership committee. And my notes furthermore say, go Red Sox. Yes, that's also in the announcements. And last spring, a number of our youth and adults participated in the UU United Nations seminar in New York. And this morning's service features our guest from the UUUNO, Allison Hess. You may remember last year, Bruce Knotts, the executive director, spoke to us on the occasion of United Nations Sunday. And today, Allison Hess will be speaking with us as well. So we welcome you, Allison. And we're going to encourage people who would like to have some conversation with Allison to stay here in the sanctuary following the service, and we'll have some conversation, particularly the Building Bridges folks, but everybody else as well. That spring seminar last spring included Amelia Lyda, and Amelia is going to tell us a little bit of what that was about. Amelia, you're up.
Hi, I'm Amelia, and today I'm going to be talking about my experience about going to New York for a seminar on migration and visiting the UN during the UUUNO Intergenerational Spring Seminar. Abby, Van Prague, Nathan Linden, Paris Stone, and I all went. We stayed in a youth hostel with kids from all over the U.S. that had come for this event. In the morning, we would go to a church and have morning worship. Then we'd be split into groups and do different activities that related to immigration. Then there would be speakers that came in and talked to us about their experience with it. Some people told great stories about how they came to America, and others told stories about how they helped people. This one story stuck out to me. This lawyer had just gotten a job, and within a few weeks she had many people asking her for help. She told us the story about how she helped these two sisters. They had just come to the United States and did not know anything about America. This man came up to them and told them they could go into this house and take anything they wanted. They were so happy. They walked out with a TV, and a neighbor saw them and called the police. Turns out the man who told them to take something was robbing the house. The girls went to jail, and they had no say because they didn't speak any English. So this lawyer fought for these girls and got them out of jail. I thought that this story was really important, and I never knew how much trouble immigrants had in the U.S. Another big event that we did was go to the United Nations office. We got to go to a conference there and listen to many important people talk about problems with immigration today in the United States. This really changed my views on immigration, and now I know so much more. I think it is a really important topic, and more people need help finding a job and starting a new life.
Thanks, Amelia. And there will be another spring seminar coming up in 2019, so you may wish to think about whether you would like to join that as well. And now is a good time for kids and teachers to go off to your classes, and as you do, we will sing Spirit of Life. Freely we have received, freely give. For the good work of this congregation within and far, far beyond these walls, our offering will now gratefully be received. And Jerry Ross is our envoy to the UU United Nations organization, and Jerry is going to introduce Allison. Why don't both of you come on up?
Good morning. So I'm very pleased to introduce Allison Hess, who is the International Engagement Associate at the UU United Nations office, and I'm going to say in a moment some of the things she does as that. But first, a word about her. Allison is a third-generation UU. She's like an original. And she was born and grew up in Southern California, attended Colby in Maine, from California to Maine, and at some point became an intern at the UU United Nations office. And she apparently liked that well enough to go there to do a lot of things for them, where she works to connect UU congregations in the United States and Canada with resources and opportunities to engage with our global faith and with the work of the United Nations and Worldwide Justice Program. That's a mouthful. Actually, you met Bruce Knotts here last year. Bruce is the director of the UU United Nations office, and Allison is the second person in that office. Now, there's a famous saying about what rolls downhill when you're the second person in an office, and Allison sort of is a catcher of that and does lots of different things. She especially works with the envoy as an envoy coordinator. That's what she started doing when she came there. She's still doing it, so that she's the main person that I interact with, along with many envoys from other congregations, again, from both the United States and Canada, because the UU United Nations office is also represents Canada, UU congregations in Canada at the United Nations. She also leads the Intergenerational Spring Seminar. Now that involves a lot of planning. It also involves standing in the rain outside the UN Security Office. There's a little story about this. When we were at the Spring Seminar last year, one of the really exciting events was that we were planning to go to the United Nations for a meeting. The night before, the UNO office learned that our young people couldn't get in unless they had a government-issued ID. Many of our young folks had student IDs which didn't work. So Allison scrambled and worked with people and so on and got special permission to get us in. So that morning we traipsed over in the rain and got to the security office, where we were met with a burly security guard who declined to let us in the door and said, "I know nothing about this. I report to my commander. I know nothing about this." So we then, those of us without IDs, were standing in the rain. It was actually a wonderful object lesson for documentation, because the young people who had documentation walked into the UNO, and the rest of us who didn't have IDs stood in the rain, while Allison called, made phone calls, talked to many, many people, and eventually got us in. So among the many things that she does there, I'm pleased to introduce Allison Hess from the United Nations office, the UU United Nations office.
Thank you, Jerry. Good morning, everyone. The number 7 is pretty common as a number of items in a list or a series. There are 7 Harry Potter books. Unitarian Universalism has 7 principles. There are 7 wonders of the world, and of course 7 deadly sins. 17, on the other hand, is not so common. When I did a Google search a few days ago to find out, I searched for a list of 17, And the only real result I got was actually the thing I was looking for, which was a list of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. There was also a list of NC-17 movies, which was definitely not what I was looking for. So apparently there aren't exactly 17 of a lot of things. At least according to my very scientific Google search. 17 is not a particularly common or popular number. It's also a prime number, so from a mathematical perspective, it's not particularly fun either. But I digress. There are indeed 17 Sustainable Development Goals. If you've attended a United Nations Sunday here in the past few years, or otherwise tend to pay attention to the United Nations, you will have heard of these goals, which are sometimes referred to just as the global goals. So, quick show of hands. Before I just mentioned them, how many people had heard of these goals before? Okay. And I'm not going to put anyone on the spot, but of those who raised their hands, how many know what they are beyond just that they exist? Okay, well, don't worry. I'm going to tell you. So here we go. It's your chance to find out. The 2015 United Nations General Assembly adopted these 17 goals as an action plan for the planet, with the recognition that no one country can achieve success and develop all by itself. The United Nations is building on the principle of interdependence. It has been no end of frustrating in the last year or two to see our own country's leaders move farther away from interdependence towards isolationism, and I'm sure you felt that too. As Unitarian Universalists, we are called to respect the interdependence of all things on earth. And it's extremely upsetting and discouraging when we see that principle of our interdependence being pushed to the side, as if it weren't true, when we know that it is. Which is why we need places to find hope. Places that show evidence of what can happen when people come together instead of running away from each other. For me, that hope comes in the form of the United Nations. It's not perfect, nothing is perfect, but it's as close an aspiration as I can think of for a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Each of the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, from ending poverty to improving infrastructure to ensuring clean, affordable energy, relies on the others, just like every country in the world relies on the other countries to support and learn from one another. One compelling thing about the Sustainable Development Goals, as opposed to the Millennium Development Goals that preceded them, is that the Sustainable Development Goals are not just focused on developing countries. The SDGs, as they're known, are for all of us, because no country or society in the world has it all figured out, but all have things that they can teach each other. So all of these 193 countries in the UN have agreed to contribute to achieving these 17 goals between now and 2030. Here's the important thing, though. The Sustainable Development Goals are not just about the numbers. They're not about countries negotiating and signing declarations. They're about the whole world working together. So it's not just Malawi trying to lower its HIV infection rate, but a collaboration of innovators from around the world coming together to figure out how to provide HIV treatment to rural women worldwide who can't afford it. They're about creating space on an international level to share techniques for lowering carbon emissions and countries holding each other accountable for the commitments that they have made. Most importantly, the Sustainable Development Goals are about each of us making a small difference in our local context, but that change having a global impact because the whole world is working on it. This is actually true of the United Nations overall, not just the SDGs. When a country signs on to an international treaty or resolution, such as the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, That country's leaders are acknowledging that the goals or sentiments within that declaration are something they want to get behind. Nitty-gritty implementation might not even be considered by those at the treaty negotiating table, because it's not always the job of the UN representatives to implement the treaty. It's the job of policymakers within the country itself. So resolutions at the United Nations are all about setting standards and norms. Representatives from the many countries of the world will gather together to make a statement about how the world is, or how it should be. And then it is up to national governments, local leaders, and individual citizens to take up those resolutions and make them into a reality. The United Nations just finalized the text for a global compact for migration, which will be formally adopted in December. This compact is being created as more than 68 million people are currently forcibly displaced by conflict or disaster. This crisis has been ongoing for several years and shows no sign of letting up. It is clear that our world is increasingly on the move. Some of these people on the move qualify as refugees, a legal term referring to those who are forced to flee their country based on a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Those who do not meet the legal definition of a refugee are referred to within the general term of migrants. The Global Compact for Migration tells us that refugees and migrants are entitled to the same universal human rights and fundamental freedoms, which must be respected, protected, and fulfilled at all times. However, due to their separate legal frameworks, only refugees are entitled to the specific international protection as defined by international refugee law. Because of this, and the enormous complexity and seeming arbitrary nature of many countries' many different migration policies, the Global Compact sets a framework to address migration in all its dimensions, affirming the treatment and rights to which all migrants are entitled. The Unitarian Universalist United Nations Office's recommended theme for United Nations Sunday this year is When Crisis Calls, Advancing Just Migration for All, which was also the topic of our intergenerational spring seminar that took place in April. All of this work being done to advance just migration for all, both at the United Nations and within Unitarian Universalism and activist circles around the United States, is centered on the need for fundamental human rights of all refugees and migrants to be respected, protected, and fulfilled. We may think of human rights as a rather abstract idea in practice, but these human rights were actually set to paper almost exactly in December, 70 years ago, by the United Nations General Assembly in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The first article of that declaration has always resonated strongly with me as a statement of what it is to be human in our world. But since I began preparing for this year's UN Sunday topic, I cannot help thinking about this article as what it means to live in a globalized world working for just migration. Article 1 states, with a slight adaptation for inclusive language, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act toward one another in a spirit of siblinghood. The thing about declarations like this is that they are true whether they are enforced or not. Every human being is born free. Every human being is born equal in dignity and rights. As our Unitarian Universalist first principle would say, every person has inherent worth and dignity. When we talk about just migration, we are talking about equal dignity and rights. When we talk about working for just migration, we are talking as human beings endowed with reason. Our world's current disparate systems of migration do not serve as a shining example of the manifestation of human reason. If we were to fully live into the reason with which we have been endowed, world leaders would realize that it is beneficial economically and in terms of national security to have robust programs for resettling and integrating refugees. Our reason would make it clear that when there are millions of people fleeing their home countries, perhaps the best investment would go towards giving them somewhere secure to stay and helping their home countries become safe and livable, rather than pouring more and more money into militarizing our borders and perpetuating a cycle of violence and fear that threatens our communities as much as it threatens the lives and well-being of those who are seeking shelter here. When we talk about just migration, we are talking about acting as people endowed with conscience. When the UN wrote in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that all human beings are endowed with a conscience, it let no person off the hook for how they treat other human beings. Having a conscience means being able to determine between right and wrong, between good and bad, and knowing that there are always areas in between that aren't as clearly defined. Our worst decisions usually happen when we ignore our conscience. To have justice in our migration systems, we must be led by our conscience. When we talk about just migration, we are talking about acting toward one another in a spirit of siblinghood. Our siblings in humanity all over the world are facing dangers and situations that we can scarcely imagine. When our siblings call us for help, how do we respond? Let me tell you now, our siblings are in crisis, and they are calling. We are past the point of claiming ignorance. We have seen the photos of overflowing rafts crossing the Mediterranean. We have heard the cries of children who are separated from their parents at our own southern border. It's infuriating and heartbreaking to live in a country where many of our leaders so blatantly reject reason and ignore their conscience. It's exhausting to be constantly shouting for what seems a simple request to recognize humanity and feel like no one's listening. Many of us are answering these calls, including many in this community who are working on sanctuary work in the congregation and in the country at large. To those who are feeling drained, I say take heart. We are here too. The United Nations is here too. The international community of Unitarians and Universalists is here too. One of the two co-presidents of the negotiating process for the Global Compact for Migration was Mexico's ambassador to the United Nations, Juan José Gómez Camacho. Ambassador Camacho recently spoke about the Global Compact for Migration at a conference for non-governmental organizations at the UN. He told participants that the reason we now have this Global Compact and are working on migration together is not that we are nicer than before, but that globalization has made our prosperity interdependent. Our self-interest today requires that we work with others. If problems are inherently transnational, we cannot even imagine a national solution. End of quote. The issues we are dealing with today, migration, climate change, extreme inequality, militarization, these are all inherently transnational. We must have international solutions. The Global Compact for Migration is one of those solutions, as is the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and so many other examples of countries coming together to try to solve problems that affect us all. Each of us has a role to play in this. The Unitarian Universalist Office at the UN is your congregation's link to that global solutions community. As Ambassador Camacho said to the delegates assembled, civil society does not tell the United Nations countries and agencies what is right or wrong, but what is real. What are you seeing in your community? The United Nations needs your opinions and your experience and your input. Every day, staff people at the UUNO attend meetings and events at the UN with a chance to uplift Unitarian Universalist values on this global stage. If you want to be a part of that, get in touch with the amazing Envoy team of youth and adults here at First Parish Bedford, and please speak to me after the service. 70 years ago, when the UN General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they were articulating a list of inherent inalienable rights that every human being possesses, no matter their place or status of birth. Those rights exist for all of us, and we must be engaged to make sure that they are respected, protected, and fulfilled for every person in every place on this planet. There is so much that we can do when we come together. Let us embark on that magnificent collective journey, together now, into the great possibility and uncertainty, making progress bit by bit. May it be so. Blessed be.
Come and Go With Me is our last hymn. It's number 1018 in the teal hymnal.
Our closing words are, may the love which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us, now and always.